Now, in the second of the talks around various themes of fasting and Lent, it kind of implied that you might really be able to get away without not fasting and praying at all. That if you behave yourself in the right way, then God's going to be really, really pleased. Well, of course, if you behave yourself in the right way, God is going to be really, really pleased. And that behavior involves loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. It involves being focused on God, devoted to him, praising him, following him 365 or 366 days in a year, but also to reflect that in a love for humanity and caring for the poor and the needy and supporting those who need support. Okay. So why does Jesus say when you fast? Because he does in Matthew. And he says, you do it privately. It's a private prayer thing, which is something worth noting. This is a piece of personal devotion. It's not something one should be cajoling or putting pressure on each other to do. But he does say when you fast. What's that about? Well, it's actually not to do with whether or not the church says we ought to do something during Lent. Because, of course, if it's a communal thing, it's not a personal thing. If you're under pressure to do it or feel obliged to do it, then we've missed the point. What Lent does is throw light on a number of the issues I raised in the first talk, but also it reminds us of the need to be constantly renewing our devotion to God. Now, some people only go into home groups in Lent, and then they kind of leave it out for the rest of the year. Well, it's pretty toxic, really. It's not a good idea. It simply makes one feel as if doing a normal piece of Christian activity is somehow a special thing that you're specially doing at that time of the year because that's the thing to do. If we're only interested in discipleship during Lent, remember it's supposed to be a devotional and penitential time rather than a discipleship time, then there are questions there. And some people in that devotional time of Lent will end up going into groups and then looking at social justice issues. Now, we can see from talk 2 that that could be a good idea, but if it's not combined with a devotional undergirding, then really we've ended up with the second commandment but not the first, and without the first commandment the second one doesn't work. Remember, we love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength first, and then love our neighbours as ourselves. So what about this fasting business? Well, firstly, fasting could be complete abstinence from food. Not all of us medically can do that. Not all of us physically can do that. And it wasn't actually necessarily the way that that was done in the medieval period. What people did in that period was they would abstain from certain foods for a short, certain period of time. You're going to have to keep packing in the calories if you're in manual labour, which of course most people were. But there were certain things that you simply didn't consume during that period. So you have to look at that and think about that and think who you're doing it for. You might not, don't think, oh, it's a convenient way to lose weight, because then of course that's nothing to do with God. We have to keep the purposes of our hearts focused on Jesus. And then, yes, we do fast and pray because we want Jesus to act. It may be to act in that way of increasing our own devotion. It might be over a particular situation. But we also have to understand there's a tremendous power in this. And when that power is loosed, it doesn't necessarily do what we want it to do, but it will do something. And that's to do with the way that God works. God doesn't have a straightforward cause and effect. It's not like you put the coin in the machine and a ticket comes out the bottom. It's nothing like that. What it is about if we do things which are attractional to the presence of God, the presence of God is loosed and things are touched and changed and transformed. So if we just set aside that time, give God time, in the context of depriving oneself of things in order to be focused on God, then tremendous things can happen. And one of the things that can happen is actually simply that we consecrate places. We attract God's presence into that place in such a way that anything that was there before, which was dark or difficult, can be excluded. Be attentive to God as to what God wants you to do, how God wants you to respond. But simply proving that you can go for 6 weeks without chocolate achieves very little on its own. In fact, it achieves nothing. What God wants us to do is to, if we're going to go without things, then there has to be a flip side. Is that money going to go to charity? That's a nice idea. But where's the first commandment in this? Where's the loving the Lord your God with all your mind, soul, heart and strength? How is that going to be reflected in our Lenten behaviour? How is that going to be reflected throughout the year? We don't just fast in Lent or Advent. We do it when it's needed. When we really need God to come into a situation, then we can do that. But it's about being focused on God first. And then, of course, as I said in talk 2, let that be worked out in our behaviour. So there you are. 3 talks on Lent. I hope that what I've not done is pin you down to a collection of things you ought to do, but that I have opened up the way we need to think about this so that we can apply the principles of Lent into our lives.